That's right. All right, we're recording. Very good. Philosophy is done by asking questions. You need to practice asking questions. And I know this because the questions that I receive from you now are generally good questions, but often the formulation is quite appalling and can be greatly improved. And that's normal, right? I mean, if you're already brilliant at this, what are you doing here? Go straight to your PhD or whatever. But you must practice asking questions. You must practice asking questions. So this is a good opportunity. So the first questions come from Josh D. So Josh says, take Witzel's experiment regarding colour. Our beliefs and knowledge about what a banana looks like are altering our perception of the banana, making it extra yellow. Okay, good. And by extension, we could argue how we perceive it is wrong. Okay, that's right. So the banana's supposed to be, I mean, it really is grey and we perceive it as being a little bit yellow. Where are you going with this, Josh? He's going to tell us. He says, although the principle of acquaintance and cognitive penetration are separate, could it be argued that we are not truly acquainted with the banana because of how our thoughts and knowledge have adjusted our perception of the banana? Great, okay, good question. Now I want to tidy this up a bit. So the first thing I want to suggest is that if we're thinking about just acquaintance with the banana, it's not really clear that we have to be accurate about its colour. Colour often is a relatively superficial property. So we might be better here to rephrase your question, Josh, as about the colour of the banana, being acquainted with that colour, the surface of the banana's colour. So I think that would be a way to sort of shore up the question, avoid a possible line of objection. Once we've done that, Josh, I then want to offer you a reconstruction here. So here's a reconstruction of what I take to be the argument implicit in your question. Now, sometimes when I reconstruct things, I get them horribly wrong. So Josh, you're very welcome to tell me, either in the chat or later, that this is horribly wrong. But I think this is right. So I think you're saying we start from the assumption that cognition penetrates perception, which of course Witzel claims to have shown. That causes us to misperceive things. Sorry, not the assumption, the penetration causes us to misperceive things. But acquaintance requires veridical perception, so there's no acquaintance. How good is this argument? What kind of objection might we offer to Josh's argument? Well, I think it is not a bad argument, but I think there's a good objection to it. And I want to illustrate the objection with two dogs here. And this is where I need you, please, to use your voices. So this dog here, I hope I'm pointing at roughly this dog, top right dog. What colour would you say that dog is, the top right dog?
Blue.
Excellent. Blue. Yeah? Okay, so we've got a lot of consensus on blue. Now, bottom left dog. What colour is the bottom left dog?
Yellow.
Who said purple?
Green.
Seriously? Someone seriously thinks it's green?
Yellow.
Have we got consensus?
Also, it's probably blue.
Sorry? Is it one more time?
Yellow.
Okay. And I think most people, although we've got maybe a bit of variation here, most people are going to admit that they're different coloured dogs. Now here's the cool thing. When I take away the background, so what you should be now seeing is the two dogs against a completely grey background. It's so much more fun with your
I
voice.
never saw it coming.
Excellent. Never saw it. I love that. What you should see is that the two dogs are actually the same colour. And just to be sure about this, I've got a little film here where we're gradually going to make the background grey. So different people will see the shift at different points. You have been scanned by the dogs. Okay, now, serious point here. Partly I just love the dogs, of course. But there is a serious point, which is that most people who are proponents of cognitive penetration think that the effect of your beliefs and knowledge on your perception actually makes your perceptions more veridical, not less. The point of the dogs is this, that actually identifying the true colour of an object is quite a difficult problem for your perceptual processes to solve, because the way that a surface reflects light will depend on all kinds of factors. So there isn't any way to do this ignoring background. If you ignore background, you'll never be able to get the correct colour of the objects. In many cases though, it's not super common, but it can happen that the background creates a kind of an illusion, as in the case of the two dogs. They appear to be different colours when the background is present. So it follows that if you already had antecedent knowledge about what colour the dogs were, and that could cognitively penetrate your perceptual experience, you could be more accurate about the colour of the dogs. Now, what's curious about this effect, of course, is that the illusion is robust. So I go back here, and I think most people will agree that the dogs still look different colours, even though you're now quite sure that they're actually the same colour. But most people, I think, will agree they still perceive them as different colours. So this is a case where we seem not to have cognitive penetration, of course. But our point isn't that we're going to get cognitive penetration in this case. The point I'm offering you is that cognitive penetration is supposed to make your perceptions more veridical, not less veridical, normally. Now, Josh, you're absolutely right, of course, that in the Witzel et al. Experiment with the banana, subjects misperceive the grey as yellow. So there is a case of misperception there. But that's supposed to be a consequence of a process which generally, in the normal run of things, will create perceptions that are more veridical. So I think that somebody who wants to hold on to the thesis that cognition penetrates perception and Russell's principle of acquaintance should reject premise 2 of your argument. I think this is the thing to reject here, and the reason for rejecting it is to say that there is a good theoretical reason to think that cognitive penetration will make our perceptions more accurate rather than less. So I like Josh's first question because it provides us with an argument linking cognitive penetration to Russell's principle. That's very helpful. And it also brings up the important point. It also brings up the important point about cognitive penetration that I noticed from reading your essays. A lot of people thought that cognitive penetration is going to necessarily introduce inaccuracy. Kenneth, you said, where do I find all the videos? I actually made the dog video myself there. The image I found, you can see the source in the slides here. So I borrowed the image from the internet, but I made the video myself. I was very proud of myself for doing that. But I spent some time looking for it and I couldn't find it. So I made it myself. Thank you, Kenneth. Okay. Josh, second question from you. Could it be, and I should say here, Josh is getting a lot of attention, but I got 3 questions, so I feel like it's okay. If you would like some attention, I'm very happy to give it to you. Send me the questions in advance. You'll get lots of attention in the lecture. So this one stars Josh and Suleiman. Josh, could it also be argued... Thank you, David. Thank you, Muntasir. Josh, could it also be argued that if we now know we are seeing the yellow differently to the true yellow of the banana, that our perception of the colour will continue to alter? For example, the yellow will continue to get brighter every time. Now, I like this, and I think here what we've got in effect is an objection to very strong claims about cognitive penetration. Suppose you were somebody who thought that cognitive penetration is just the normal way of things, the normal run of things. Then Josh, I think you're absolutely right. What we should expect is that once you know that the banana is being misperceived as yellow when it's really grey, that belief ought then to filter into your perceptions and the perceptual effect ought to disappear. So a proponent of a strong thesis about cognitive penetration will be making a very bold prediction here, that if you tell people in advance and you really convince them about the illusion and provide them with lots of knowledge, when they then subsequently do the experiment adjusting the banana's colour, they won't make the mistake of going too blue. Great prediction. I really like that prediction, Josh. And I think it shows just how we would test a thesis about cognitive penetration. What someone might say in response to that, though, what could we say in response to that? So Josh, you've got potentially an interesting prediction generated by hypothesis about cognition penetrating perception. And that prediction is kind of risky, so could lead to an objection, could lead to the view that cognition doesn't penetrate perception. If I were a proponent of cognitive penetration, doesn't really matter whether I am or not, but hypothetically, say I am. If I were a proponent of cognitive penetration, then I might distinguish between the idea that your beliefs can have an immediate effect on your perceptions versus the idea that your beliefs can, over time, slowly reconfigure your perceptual systems. And I might say, look, you've had so much experience with bananas over the years that your perceptual systems have now shifted towards being biased to see bananas as yellow. But that takes a lot of training. So what I might say is that there's only diachronic cognitive penetration. That's to say that your beliefs have a long-term effect over lots of experience on your perception. And that would, of course, modify the answer to your question. So Josh, I hope that makes sense. The thought is, first of all, I think the answer to your question is roughly yes, but if we're being more careful, we should distinguish between the synchronic and the diachronic claims about cognitive penetration, and that will give us a more nuanced yes. Marvellous. Okay, Josh, thank you for those questions. Soliman, over to you. Oh, let's see, I've got Josh here in the conversation. Wo ist der Papageientaucher? Der Papageientaucher. Was für ein Papageientaucher? Papagei? Das ist ja kein Papagei. Meinst du das? Okay, never mind. Josh, thank you very much. Soliman, you've really baffled me and I've just come to your question. I don't know what's going on. Here we go. I'm just going to tell people about your question anyway, because I think it's great. Soliman, if experiencing hallucinations due to the defects in internal stimulation related to associated objects for which these are wholly triggered within the mind, do we not associate this with perception being penetrated by cognition? Very good. Okay. He is asking, yeah, you see, a puffin isn't a papagei though, is it? This is kein Papagei. This is kein Papagei, but thank you, Jasmine. Perception, sorry. So Soliman's idea basically is that hallucination provides a case of perception penetrating cognition, especially when one has had past experience with fear acting upon the precepts. So anybody who's ever had a bad trip knows that the bad trip is often a consequence of things that you have feared or that you do fear in your life. So this idea is, of course, very, very common. Now, Soliman, so I think you're onto something here, but when I was thinking about this question, I thought to myself, hallucination's kind of hard to study, at least legally, in a way that's highly reproducible. Oh, sorry, there's one more part. Thus we may infer, says Soliman, that cognition does penetrate our perceptions. Great. So I've argued, if you remember, if you've seen that, I've argued in the conclusion that we don't really have evidence for cognitive penetration. So Soliman, like other people, has been trying to argue that we do. Fantastic. Okay, that's exactly what we want. Constructive opposition. So my suggestion here is that, Soliman, your question is really good, but hallucination's kind of hard for us to really study. We can get the same kind of argument going, structurally the same argument going, by thinking about hypnosis. And there are some studies of hypnosis which are potentially quite reproducible. So you can't really subject someone to some kind of induced hallucination and then put them in a scanner. But you can, it turns out, hypnotize them and do all kinds of brain measurements. So hypnosis turns out to give you, Soliman, a way of building the same argument. So, for example, in the Kovisto et al. Experiment, okay, good. So we're even, Soliman, you're even thinking about hypnosis as well. Fantastic. In the Kovisto et al. Experiment, two highly susceptible people were told all triangles are red, and then in the normal in a hypnosis phase, then in a waking stage, one of them reported altered colours in the triangles, and you could also see markers of the changed colour perception already around 70 to 120 milliseconds after the stimulus onset. That rapidity of the effect and the fact that the effect was absent when the subject was just asked to simulate the effects of suggestion without actually being hypnotized indicate that there really was an effect on hypnosis of the colour perception. So I think this would be a kind of simple, stripped down, in a way kind of less interesting, but more tractable case, where it looks like you can create a hallucination or an illusion of colour using hypnosis. So Solomon, I think there's a lot to your question. But should we take this as evidence of cognitive penetration? Should we take this as evidence of cognitive penetration? Now this is the really cool bit. If we go to what I've offered you as the canonical definition from the current, I would say the currently main authorities on this topic, Firestone and Scholl, they say to say that vision is cognitively penetrated is to say that our beliefs, desires, emotions, actions, and even the languages we speak can directly influence what we see. And here I think, Solomon, if you're sticking to this definition, then it seems to me that we would have a case of cognitive penetration here. So the influence doesn't seem in any interesting way indirect, and there is influence. So I would be very happy to say, if we go with this definition, then you're absolutely right in suggesting that hypnosis provides evidence for cognitive penetration. But of course, that isn't the only definition that I have offered you. So you'll notice that I offered you an alternative way of thinking about cognitive penetration. This isn't really a definition. I shouldn't have called it a definition. So it's an idea, and the idea is very simple. Sensory inputs provide us with incomplete information about objects. You saw that in the case of the dogs. The sensory inputs are not providing you with enough information to determine the colour of the surfaces of the dogs. You actually need to do some further processing. Perceptual processes actually do that. They fill in some of the missing information in accordance with principles specifying how objects behave. So for example, where light sources come from and so on. I'll come to that in a second, Sam. Good question. So I think one way to formulate a question of cognitive penetration is to say, can anything that you know or believe be used to fill in that missing information? And what I want to suggest here is very simple. Solomon, I think, oh sorry, that's going one too far there. I think that in the case of hypnosis, the hypnotic suggestion is not actually working to fill in the missing information. It's providing a kind of interference effect via associative networks. It's providing an interference effect via associative networks. So the role of that hypnotically induced impression, all triangles are red, is something quite different from the role of a principle which is actually used by a perceptual process to uncover information. And of course it matters to me here that with hypnosis you can create less veridical experiences, but you can't systematically create more veridical experiences. You can't enhance veridicality. So my suggestion is that the second definition is actually the more interesting way of thinking about cognitive penetration. Because if you go back to the Witzel et al. Banana study, as we might call it, beliefs are supposed to be filling in information there. That's really what's happening. The belief is supposed to be providing you additional useful information about the colour of the banana. Whereas in the hypnosis type studies, and I take it probably in hallucination and illusion as well, the beliefs would be creating interference rather than allowing us to fill in extra information. So Solomon, I think that the answer to your question is both yes and no simultaneously, and it really depends on which definition you take. I like my definition. One last thing to say about my definition, if I may, is that it fits very nicely with what the expert on this field says, Zenon Polishin, as well. But I'm going to skip that for now, and we might go back to that, you and I, in conversation. Anybody else who's interested as well. There's quite a lot to do on the definition of cognitive penetration. To be honest, I didn't think that enough people would be super interested here, and this question shows that I was wrong, so thank you for that. Very exciting. Now, this session is going to finish officially in 5 minutes, and although I'm going to hang out for a little bit longer informally, I would like definitely to get Adam's question in. Oh, sorry, but before I do that, Sam Walsh, that's right. Sam, you made, sorry, I'm going to go back to hypnosis for a second. Doesn't really matter where we are here. Sam, you made a very good suggestion. You said, wouldn't hypnosis change the account of what we see rather than the thing that we see itself? And that's a very interesting suggestion. And when I was following up on Soliman's question, I had to do some research, and I came across a thesis by David Bittner at the CEU, a PhD thesis, and indeed he argues just for that conclusion as well. He argues that the hypnotic process influences the report of what's seen and not the fact of what's seen. However, what I'm concerned about in his, he may be right, he's done a whole thesis on this, so he may be right. What concerns me about that interpretation is just the very early brain activity, which provides a marker of the change in perceived colour. It's very hard to think that it could be, but it's very hard to think that if it was just changing the person's account of what's perceived rather than the perceptual process itself, that you would get such a rapid response. Non-deductive argument. I'm unsure about this, so I think your suggestion is certainly worth taking seriously, but I sort of struggle to fully endorse it either way. I think that's tricky. Okay, Adam, over to your question. And Adam, rather gloriously, is offering another attempt to refute my suggestion that we don't currently have evidence for cognitive penetration. Excellent, good. There's nothing I like more than being refuted. Adam, if someone talks to you underwater, you usually can't understand what they're saying. But if you know what they're going to say beforehand, then you can understand them perfectly. Does a phenomenon such as that not prove the existence of cognitive penetration? Okay, very good. So I like the structure of the argument, and you've made the point with great clarity. So that's good. The minor objection I have here, you can respond to very quickly. My objection initially is, look, Adam, understanding isn't the same thing as perceiving. So you haven't shown that perception is cognitively penetrated. You've shown that understanding is cognitively penetrated, but you know that isn't controversial. However, so that's my initial reply to your objection to my conclusion. But I think you should come right back to me, Adam. I think you should come right back to me and you should say, Steve, okay, fair enough. Understanding, let's not worry about that. You don't have to concede that I'm right. You just have to say, Steve, my objection will work anyway. The reason your objection will work anyway is that there is a phenomenon called phoneme restoration. So very often, when somebody is talking, you might have incomplete information about the phonetic gestures they're producing in talking. So you can imagine someone who says, I picked up the b and hit the ball. So what you've got there is a case where there's the b phoneme is audible, but the other phonetic gestures are deleted from the stimulus. And what has been noted many times, very nicely reproduced, is that people will actually fill in the missing phonemes, taking into account the larger context of the utterance. So that if you hear a b, t, but there's a range of things that could be. It could be a bat, it could be a butt, it could be a range of things. I guess I can't think of the other things it could be. And what people will generally do is fill in the missing phoneme based on the larger context. And that's thought to be a case of cognitive penetration of perception. So Adam, I think you're on absolutely the right lines here. It turns out to be quite tricky to sort this thing out. Fodor, in his book Modularity of Mind from '83, has quite a long discussion of the phoneme restoration effect. And what he concludes, I think rightly, is that phoneme restoration doesn't count as cognitive penetration in the sense that I've offered the definition and in the Polish sense, but it would count as cognitive penetration in the Scholl and Firestone more loosely defined influence sense. So Adam, I think you're absolutely bang on the money. I think you're bang on the money. It's a really good question, but I think that you want to shift from understanding to phoneme restoration, and then you want to take this argument further by going and checking out Fodor's counter offer against your offer. So the short answer though is that we haven't got a, as you say, a proof of cognitive penetration. We haven't got a proof of cognitive penetration. Excellent. Adam, thank you for that. Soliman and Josh, thank you for the questions. That's very good. It's 12:30, so anybody who would like to should of course feel completely free to leave at this point, but I'm going to hang around for another 15 minutes to give myself a little bit of time before my seminar start at 1. Thank you, Adam, that's good. So do feel free to ask more questions or make irreverent comments or however you like. David. So David, I've got David B here. Okay, David, this is very, very interesting. I don't have a quick way to put your comment on the screen. I wish I could. I'm going to read out David's comment, and I hope that you could check this out in the chat for anybody who's interested. David says, I've been puzzling about the true difference between perceptual awareness versus actual cognitive penetration. Feels like it's almost impossible to isolate perception without having some conscious interference, and thus it seems like it's hard to truly create a perfect experiment without basically having unconscious participants. Okay, I think this is a very sharp observation, David. I think you're onto something. I think you're onto a genuine difficulty here. But I want to suggest, David, that actually there is a way for us to get around the problem. So I agree with you. I think this is right for what it's worth. I mean, I might be wrong as well. That if we really want to study cognitive penetration, it'd be quite good if we could get rid of the perceptual awareness components, because those are just bound to be contaminated by perceptual reports. So we'd have clearer evidence of cognitive penetration if we had cases of perception without awareness. And that's a nice suggestion because it provides a link between the second and the third topics of this course, cognitive penetration being the second, and perception without awareness being the third topic. So David, I'm just thinking how much to say here. What I'm going to come to later in the lectures is what's called a process dissociation attempt to distinguish perceptual processes from perceptual awareness. Process dissociation approach. David, I was actually wondering whether or not to put that in the lectures, and I was just deciding I wouldn't put it in the lectures, and now you've changed my mind. What happens in effect is that in a process dissociation response, instead of trying to get unconscious participants, which is kind of difficult to do, I think, there's all sorts of ethical and practical issues here. Would you like to be made unconscious for an experiment? Not much. Is it safe? No, I don't know. So we're going to have conscious participants, but the process dissociation approach is very simple, David. What we do is we imagine that every response somebody gives us is a consequence both of something that they're aware of, and also some processes that don't involve perceptual awareness at all. So there are two kinds of process contributing to the response. The idea is to try to disentangle those two processes, to isolate the relative contribution of each. So we don't have participants that are unconscious, rather we have a variety of different scenarios in which we can know something about the relative contribution of the awareness and the non-aware processes. And so we can separate out the two. Now that's a little bit compressed off the cuff, as it were. David, I'm going to put in a section next week's lectures on process dissociation, and that will hopefully provide an answer to your question. But you may be still unsatisfied, and if you are, that would be great, and you should ask another question. Excellent. Okay. So thank you very much, David. Now here comes Jasmine. Jasmine, if cognition does not penetrate perception, are we humans then fundamentally ununique? Does that mean we all perceive things the same way? I see. Ununique. Okay. Jasmine, that's a really deep question, isn't it? All right. So one thing I've been stressing, Jasmine, is that if you think that cognition does penetrate perception, then actually what somebody's antecedent theories are may well affect what they perceive. So I do think that you're right to this extent, that if we think that there is no cognitive penetration, then one reason for thinking that humans are going to differ in what they perceive is taken away from us. But of course, it doesn't follow that taking away one reason will eliminate any other. Now, in principle, it could happen that humans are vary, right? There could be sort of differences in their perceptual processes. It turns out, I think, as a matter of fact, that not just humans, but across many animals, perceptual processes look remarkably common. There's not actually that much difference in perceptual processes across primates, for example. So I think that there is a kind of possibly ununique, as you rather lovely put it, thesis to be had here. But I would also want to be cautious. And the reason I'd want to be cautious is this. If you go back to the way I'm thinking following Polishyn about cognitive penetration, cognitive penetration is a matter of things you know or believe filling in missing information. And as I was stressing in response to the question from Soliman, I don't think that that's incompatible with the idea that things you know or believe could have interference, could cause interference in what you perceive. So it may be that there are sources of differences between humans, even if there isn't cognitive penetration in this sense. Okay, so complicated, difficult question. There's a lot more research that we could do on that. We really ought to take that as a topic in its own right. It could be one of our 7 topics. But I think the quick answer is we should be very cautious about thinking that humans are ununique, as you put it. Okay, very good. So thank you, Jasmine. That's wonderful. I've got Sam again, but I'm going to go, Sam, if it's all right, I'm going to go to Kenneth first because I haven't had a question from Kenneth yet. What might someone who defends cognitive penetration say about the tunnel effect? Yeah, that's a very good question. I would like to know. So one thing that I'm sort of unhappy about, if you read the philosophers like Lupian or Clarke, who are proponents of cognitive penetration, they rarely seem to offer robust responses to the arguments against them. And Kenneth, you're absolutely right that phenomena such as the tunnel effect do seem to provide good evidence that cognitive penetration is at best something kind of rare and very hard to elicit. So yeah, I actually don't know what the arguments against that view are, and I've really struggled to find a compelling sort of theoretical case against those studies. Now, it might be wrong, so there might be some bias in me, or I might be missing something pretty major. To be honest, I haven't taught this course before, and I'm learning as I go. I'm doing sort of the research as I go. So it may well be that there are people on the course who can point me to, a really good argument that says, look, although the tunnel effect is real, so is cognitive penetration. Some kind of, debunking argument there. And the reason I'm hopeful about that, Kenneth, is because I've had such good objections to the claim that we don't have evidence from cognitive penetration. I don't yet accept those objections, but they've all been really solid attempts so far. Thank you, Kenneth. Okay, Sam, let's come to you now. And this is, I think, probably, Sam, you're probably the last question. Sam, so I've explained that the side for cognitive penetration has been disproven in some ways. That's right, indeed. But doesn't this feed back to the idea that we vary in our beliefs and thoughts, hence meaning it's unlikely that 2 people will react to information in the same way? Aha, okay, good. So, Sam, thank you for that question. This links to a conversation that I'm having with Paratam as well, and I decided not to sort of feature that in this section because I wasn't super sure that would be okay. About the relation between theory and observation, which is the 7th topic for this course, the last topic for this course. So Sam, very good. I think the short answer is I want to be cautious and say no. So as a matter of fact, you and I think, Sam, would probably agree that people do vary quite widely in their beliefs. Just think about politics at the moment. There are kind of chasms. Nevertheless, the reason I want to be cautious and say no is this. If we think that the evidence for cognitive penetration can be debunked in one way or another, as you say, sometimes it just can't be replicated. Other times, it seems that although the evidence stands up, there are further predictions of the cognitive penetration hypothesis that are not supported, and so we're left in a difficult position there. I don't think it follows that from that there's any variation in what people think or believe at all. I think it's probably true that people differ in what they think and believe, but Sam, I don't think that follows from the research on cognitive penetration itself. So in fact, I'm teaching a course next term for honours students, so it's not really for first year students, called Moral Psychology. And moral psychology is all about the way that people differ in their moral convictions and moral abilities. So I think you're absolutely right that there's a lot of interesting variation in what people believe and know. But Sam, I'm not happy with the thought that we can get that from evidence on cognitive penetration. I'm being cautious. Thank you, Sam. Okay, that's good. Right, we've got 3 minutes before I'm going to push off for the informal part of our session. So if anybody has an observation, a comment, an objection, a question, you can fire away. But if not, it's also just nice to, hang out. Yeah. How's your day been so far, Steve? Thank you, Muntasir. My day has been excellent, thank you. It's been really good. I had a wonderful morning. I just did some checking on hypnosis following Soliman's question. I thought that was rather good. I've been here with my puffin. The only thing that I did wrong, I was going to bring a banana because I thought we needed a banana to illustrate the points I was making. And then right before I was coming to this, I felt a bit hungry and I ate the banana. That's the only thing that went wrong. So I think that's a pretty good day. I hope your day has been just as good. Okay, now we've got David, we've got Soliman, Kenneth. Oh my gosh, the last 3 minutes, we've got this abundance of questions. Let me see. I think David, I'm going to go first to you. If we don't get to other questions, I will try and answer those questions tonight after I finish the other meetings that I've got today. So I'm still grateful for them. Let's see, what do you say, David? Hang on a second. I'm not getting the context. David, I don't understand the question fully. David, I'm just going to ask you to clarify here, and we'll take this up later. If you could just clarify me which experiments you're suggesting should be done in real life. It sounds really interesting. I'm totally intrigued, but I'm just not getting it. I'm sorry about that. Probably I could if I had a bit more time. But try and fill me in, David, some of the details. Okay, Soliman says Jasmine is onto something. Wouldn't be the first time, actually. We may also bring forth the idea of the motor functions that run automatically, much like the brute or the child or the apes, that we can simply observe today. Okay, Soliman, I'm going to think about that more again. This is something that I'm going to have to spend quite a time processing, and I need to go back and work out what it was that Jasmine said that you're responding to as well. So thank you for that, Soliman. That's very good. Kenneth, given I don't accept cognitive penetration of perception, that's right, would you say that I endorse Russell's principle of acquaintance, or do I accept some other theory? Kenneth. So first of all, I would encourage you not to care about what I think. My views are very badly informed and very unlikely to be right. As a philosopher, not knowing things is really what I do for a living. And the truth is, I don't know. So one of the reasons that I thought I would start with Russell's principle of acquaintance and kind of feature it in this course is because I don't know whether that principle is true and what the kind of case for it might be. So Kenneth, when I started doing the research for this course, I thought to myself, you know what, I bet you that the stuff on cognitive penetration is going to show that there's a problem with Russell's principle. So that was my antecedent assumption. So I sort of expected to come out thinking that Russell's principle is false. And I was quite surprised when it seemed to me to go the other way. Now that's only provisional. So what I'm suggesting is not that I know that there isn't cognitive penetration, but that I don't know that there is. So I haven't got an objection rather than I've got a defence of the principle. The problem I find, Kenneth, I don't know if anybody else shares this view, it's actually seems to me very hard to work out what kind of consideration might move me towards accepting Russell's principle. So I can see lots of lines of objection, and as far as I can make out, none of the objections work. What I haven't found, Kenneth, I'm still looking for, and I'll let you know if I find it, is an argument in favour of the principle. So I'm stuck on this. It's an interesting question for kind of me personally, and to be honest, as I'm going through this course with you, I'm trying to work out in my own mind the answer, but I'm not hopeful because I've been thinking about this question for a long time, and I have to say that I've really struggled to make a lot of progress with it over the last decade or so. I do think, yeah, that's probably not a sensible suggestion. Yeah, I should leave it there, Kenneth. So the truth is that I actually don't know whether the principle's true or not. I'm not there yet. In a way, I'd quite like it to be. I think it's quite neat, but I don't want to accept something because it's neat. That seems to me not a good way to go. Okay, thank you very much for wonderful questions and discussion today. I will come back. So David and Soliman, I've got questions to come back to, and I'm looking forward to further written discussion with you on those questions. If you do have more questions, please send me the email, pop them in the chat, just as you like. For those of you in my seminars who are still here, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in about 10 minutes. And for everybody else, I will see you next week. Have a wonderful week. Thank you very much.